A billionaire was seconds away from saying, "I do," when a homeless 12-year-old girl ran into the church and begged him to stop the wedding. Everyone thought she was crazy until she played a short recording that exposed the bride's secret plan to steal his fortune and destroy his charity. In just 5 seconds, the perfect wedding collapsed, a shocking betrayal was revealed, and the truth from a forgotten girl changed both of their lives forever. Pull up a seat. Welcome to Afro-Moral Tales, where morals shake hands with mischief, lessons sneak in, and every tale bites gently. Before we begin, if you love stories that make you think and smile, tap that subscribe button and join our circle. It's free, and it helps us keep these tales alive. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. Now let the story begin. Daniel Reed stood alone in a quiet room behind the church hall. In a few minutes, he would walk out to the altar and marry Sophie Clark. People said he was one of the most successful men in the city. His companies worked in different countries. Technology, real estate, investments. His name appeared in magazines and business interviews. But Daniel never liked attention. He preferred simple things. Quiet work. Helping people. 10 years earlier, his life had been very different. His wife, Laura, died in a car accident. The loss broke something inside him. For a long time, he buried himself in work. Days became weeks. Weeks became years. His companies grew quickly during that time. More offices opened around the world. His wealth increased. But money never filled the empty space Laura left behind. One evening, after visiting a shelter in the city, Daniel made a decision. Instead of only building companies, he would build something that helped people. That idea became the Reed Foundation. The foundation focused on homeless youth. Children who had no family. Teenagers leaving foster care have nowhere to go. Young people who needed food, education, and a safe place to sleep. Daniel invested millions into the program. Soon shelters opened in several cities. Job training programs followed. Schools partnered with the foundation. Many people began to see Daniel Reed as more than a businessman. They saw him as someone who cared. Still, his personal life remained empty. Friends encouraged him to date again. For years he refused. Then Sophie Clark appeared. She worked at a modern art gallery downtown. She was intelligent, elegant, and confident. She understood the business world and moved easily through social events. More importantly, she showed interest in Daniel's charity work. She attended foundation dinners. She spoke kindly to volunteers. She asked thoughtful questions about the shelters. Daniel noticed how natural she seemed in those spaces. 6 months later, they became engaged. The news spread quickly through business media. "Tech investor finds love again," one headline said. Daniel tried to ignore the attention. To him, it felt simple. He believed he had finally found someone who understood his life. Someone who respected his work and his values. Now the wedding day had arrived. Through the closed door, he could hear guests gathering inside the church. Friends. Business partners. Journalists. Daniel adjusted the cuff of his jacket and looked at his reflection in the mirror. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel hopeful. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. Maybe life was giving him another chance at happiness. He took a slow breath. Then someone knocked on the door. "It's time," a voice said. Daniel Reed nodded quietly and walked toward the future he believed was waiting for him. Daniel Reed opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Soft music from inside the church drifted toward him. Guests were already seated. Voices murmured behind the tall wooden doors. In a few minutes, the ceremony would begin. Daniel walked slowly toward the entrance that led to the main hall. Staff members moved quietly around him, making final preparations. Outside the church, cameras waited. Inside, the atmosphere felt calm and organized. Everything had been planned carefully. Everything looked perfect. Across the street, someone watched the building. A thin girl stood behind a parked delivery van. Her name was Maya. She held a cracked phone tightly in her hand. From a distance, the church looked beautiful. Tall windows. Bright lights. Expensive cars parked along the street. People in elegant clothes walked toward the entrance. They laughed and greeted each other. Some glanced briefly at Maya before looking away. To them, she looked like just another street kid. No one stopped. No one asked questions. Maya had learned long ago that most people preferred not to see children like her. She did not blame them anymore. Life had taught her many things during the last 2 years. How to stay quiet. How to move quickly. How to survive. She had been 12 years old when her mother died. After that, everything changed. Social services placed her in a foster home. But the house felt cold and strict. The adults there had no patience. They shouted often. Doors stayed locked. One night Maya ran away. The city became her home. Parking garages, bus stations, closed shops, places where people rarely looked twice. But her safest place was the church. The same church where Daniel Reed was about to be married. Every night after the building closed, Maya slipped through a small window near the back. She slept behind the last row of benches. It was not comfortable, but it was quiet, and quiet meant safe. 2 weeks ago, something unusual happened. Maya woke in the middle of the night. Voices echoed from the front of the church. At first she thought it was a dream. Then she heard them clearly. 3 people were inside the small room near the altar. Maya stayed hidden in the darkness. One voice belonged to a woman. Confident, calm, familiar. Later that night, Maya would recognize it. It was the voice of Sophie Clark, the bride, the woman Daniel Reed believed he loved. Across the street, Maya stared at the church doors again. Inside, the wedding was about to begin. Her heart beat faster. She knew what she had heard. She knew what was about to happen. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she stayed silent today, Daniel Reed's life would be destroyed. Maya looked at the church doors across the street. Inside, the wedding guests were already seated. The ceremony would begin soon. Her fingers tightened around the old phone in her hand. The memory of that night returned clearly. 2 weeks earlier, Maya had been asleep behind the last row of benches inside the church. It was late. The building was supposed to be empty. Then she heard footsteps. Quiet voices followed. Maya opened her eyes slowly and stayed very still. Living on the street had taught her one important rule. When something unusual happens, stay silent and listen. The voices moved toward the front of the church. A door opened. Light spilled briefly across the floor near the altar. 3 people entered the small private room used by church staff. The door closed again. At first, Maya thought they would leave quickly. But the conversation continued. A man spoke first. His voice sounded nervous. "Are you sure this will work?" A woman answered calmly. "Of course it will work." Her voice was smooth and confident. Maya slowly pushed herself closer along the floor, careful not to make any sound. She stopped near the aisle where she could hear more clearly. The woman continued speaking. "Daniel Reed trusts me completely," she said. "He believes everything I tell him." Another man laughed quietly. "You played the role perfectly." The woman laughed too. It was easy. Maya felt something cold move through her chest. The woman kept talking. "Rich men like Daniel are predictable. You just smile, show interest in their charity work, and act supportive. After that, they believe anything." The men in the room listened carefully. One of them asked another question. "What happens after the wedding?" The woman paused for a moment. Then she answered clearly. "Once we are married, half of his assets legally become mine." Maya's heart began to beat faster. The man sounded surprised. "Half? Only the beginning," the woman replied. She explained the next steps slowly. Legal documents, financial transfers, control over Daniel's companies. Then she mentioned something else. The Reed Foundation. "The charity controls millions every year," she said. "Once I have full authority, I can move that money wherever I want." One of the men asked quietly, "And Daniel?" The woman laughed again. "By the time he understands what happened, it will be too late." Maya pressed her hand against the cold floor. The voice felt familiar now. She had heard it earlier that week inside the church during wedding planning. Suddenly, the realization hit her. The woman speaking inside that room was Sophie Clark, Daniel Reed's bride. Maya's stomach tightened. She understood the truth now. The wedding inside this church was not a love story. It was a trap. Maya stayed flat on the floor beside the aisle. Her heart beat fast, but she forced herself to stay still. Inside the small room near the altar, Sophie Clark continued speaking. Now that Maya understood who the woman was, every word felt heavier. Sophie sounded calm, almost relaxed, like someone discussing an ordinary business deal. "One signature," Sophie said. "That's all it takes." One of the men asked, "You mean the marriage certificate?" "Yes," Sophie replied. "Once that document is signed, everything begins." She explained the legal structure carefully. Marriage would automatically give her rights to half of Daniel Reed's wealth. His companies, his investments, his properties. But Sophie was not planning to stop there. "The real control comes later," she said. Maya heard papers move inside the room. The lawyer prepared another document, Sophie continued. Power of attorney. The second man sounded unsure. Daniel will question that. Sophie laughed quietly. No, he won't. She sounded completely confident. He trusts me. I will tell him it's routine paperwork for married couples. Insurance documents. Shared finances. Something simple. The lawyer spoke again. Once he signs that document, you control his financial accounts. Exactly, Sophie said. She paused for a moment before continuing. I will control his companies, his properties, and the Reed Foundation. Maya felt a tight knot in her stomach. The Reed Foundation. She knew that name. A volunteer had once given her a sandwich outside a shelter and said the food came from Daniel Reed's foundation. It had been the first real meal she had eaten in days. Inside the room, the conversation continued. One of the men sounded uneasy. What if Daniel discovers the truth? Sophie answered immediately. He won't. Her voice carried quiet arrogance. He believes I care about his charity work. I attend the events. I smile for the cameras. I listen to his speeches about helping people. She paused. Then she added something that made Maya's chest tighten. But honestly, the whole thing is ridiculous. One of the men asked, the charity? Yes, Sophie replied. All that money is going to homeless kids and shelters. Millions are wasted every year. She laughed again. With my control, that money will finally go somewhere useful. Maya pressed her lips together. She thought about the children who stood in long lines for food. She thought about the warm sandwich she once received. To Sophie, those lives meant nothing. The lawyer cleared his throat. The wedding is in 2 weeks, he reminded her. Yes, Sophie said. After that, everything changes. Maya lay in the darkness, barely breathing. She now understood the full plan. The marriage. The documents. The theft. Daniel Reed believed he was starting a new life. But the woman he trusted most was preparing to destroy everything he had built. Maya stayed in the darkness long after the voices disappeared. Eventually, the door near the altar opened. Footsteps crossed the church floor. Then silence returned. The building was empty again. Maya slowly sat up behind the last row of benches. Her heart was still racing. Everything she heard replayed inside her mind. The wedding. The legal documents. The plan to take Daniel Reed's money. And the Reed Foundation. She remembered the volunteer who once handed her a sandwich outside a shelter. This is from the Reed Foundation, the woman had said. Maya never forgot that moment. It was the first time in weeks she had eaten something fresh. Now someone wanted to destroy the person who helped people like her. Maya knew she could not ignore what she heard. But she also knew something else. No one would believe her. She was a homeless child sleeping inside a church. If she walked into a police station and told them a rich woman planned to steal millions, they would probably laugh. Or worse, they might ask why she was inside the church at night. Maya sat quietly for a long time, thinking. Finally, her eyes moved to something lying beside her blanket. An old phone. She had found it months earlier inside a trash bin near a bus stop. The screen was cracked. The battery drained quickly. But one thing still worked. The recording app. Maya picked up the phone slowly. An idea formed in her mind. If people would not believe her words, maybe they would believe something else. Proof. The next night, Maya returned to the church earlier than usual. She waited silently behind the last row again. Hours passed. The building grew quiet. Then the voices returned. The same 3 people entered the room near the altar. Maya carefully moved closer across the floor. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the recording app. She placed the phone near the small gap under the door. Then she pressed record. Inside the room, Sophie's voice filled the silence again. Let's review everything one more time, she said. The lawyer began listing the steps. The wedding ceremony. The marriage certificate. The financial documents are waiting afterward. Sophie laughed during the conversation. At one point, she said something that made Maya grip the phone tightly. Daniel Reed thinks I love him, Sophie said. He has no idea I planned this from the day I met him. The lawyer sounded impressed. You played the role perfectly. Of course, Sophie replied. I attended every charity event. I smiled at every homeless kid near his shelters. Then she said something colder. After the wedding, I won't need to pretend anymore. The recording continued for several minutes. Every detail of the plan. Every step. When the voices finally stopped and the room emptied again, Maya quickly grabbed the phone and returned to her hiding place. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. Sophie's voice came through clearly. Maya stared at the screen. Now she had something powerful. Not just a story, Evidence. Proof that Daniel Reed's future was built on a lie. And in just a few hours, the wedding would begin. Maya barely slept that night. She kept the phone close to her chest, afraid the battery might die or the file might disappear. Every few minutes, she checked the recording again. Each time she heard Sophie's voice clearly. The proof was still there. But proof alone would not stop the wedding. Maya knew she had to reach Daniel Reed before the ceremony ended. The next afternoon, the church slowly came alive. Black cars arrived one after another. Drivers opened doors as guests stepped out onto the pavement. Men wore dark suits. Women wore elegant dresses. Some carried expensive bags. Others held cameras and phones, taking pictures as they approached the entrance. The wedding had become a public event. Daniel Reed was not just a businessman. His name attracted attention. A few reporters waited near the front steps, hoping to capture photos of the couple. Maya watched everything from across the street. She stood near the same delivery van where she had hidden earlier. The cracked phone rested in her hand. Her stomach felt tight. She had never spoken to someone like Daniel Reed before. People like him lived in a different world. A world of offices, meetings, and important decisions. A world far away from sidewalks and bus stations. Guests continued entering the church. Some laughed and greeted each other warmly. Others spoke quietly about business and investments. Many of them had no idea that the wedding they came to celebrate was built on a lie. Maya wondered if Daniel already stood inside the building. Maybe he was adjusting his jacket. Maybe he was speaking with friends. Maybe he believed this was the happiest day of his life. The thought made Maya's chest ache. She remembered Sophie's voice from the recording. Cold, confident, cruel. Daniel Reed deserved to know the truth. But telling the truth would not be easy. Maya looked down at her clothes. Her jacket was thin and worn. Her shoes had small holes near the front. She imagined walking up the church steps like this. Security guards would stop her immediately. People would stare. Some might even call the police. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Maybe she should leave. Maybe someone else would discover the truth later. But then she remembered the conversation in that dark room. She remembered Sophie laughing about the Reed Foundation. About homeless kids. Kids like her. Maya closed her eyes for a second. Running away would be easier. But it would also mean letting a terrible lie win. She opened her eyes again and looked at the church doors. The ceremony was about to begin. And if she did nothing, Daniel Reed would walk into the biggest mistake of his life. And if she did nothing, Daniel Reed would walk into the biggest mistake of his life. Maya looked at the church doors one more time. Guests were still entering. The reporters had moved closer to the entrance. A few photographers lifted their cameras whenever a well-known business figure stepped out of a car. The wedding was about to start. Maya took a slow breath. Then she stepped away from the delivery van. Each step toward the church felt heavy. Her shoes scraped lightly against the pavement. People passed her without looking. Some moved aside slightly, as if they did not want to brush against her. Maya was used to that. She kept walking. The tall doors of the church stood open. Soft music drifted outside. Inside, rows of guests were already seated. But two large men stood at the entrance. Security. Both wore black suits and earpieces. Their eyes moved constantly, watching everyone who approached. When Maya reached the bottom of the steps, one of them noticed her immediately. His expression changed. "Hey," he said sharply. "You can't come in here." Maya stopped. "I need to speak to Daniel Reed," she said quickly. The guard frowned. "This is a private event," he replied. "You need to leave." "It's important," Maya said. "Please." The second guard stepped closer. "Kid, this isn't the place for you," he said. "Move along." Maya shook her head. "I just need 5 minutes," she insisted. "I have to tell him something." The first guard gave a short laugh. "Yeah, I'm sure you do." He gestured toward the street. "Go on. Before we call someone." Maya felt panic rising inside her chest. If they forced her away now, the ceremony would continue. Daniel would never hear the recording. "Please," she said again, her voice shaking. "He's in danger." Both guards exchanged a glance. The second one sighed. "Listen, kid. We're not doing this today." He reached for her arm, guiding her gently but firmly away from the entrance. Maya pulled back. "You don't understand," she cried. "It's about the wedding. It's a trap." The guard stiffened. Guests nearby began turning their heads. Whispers moved through the small crowd near the entrance. The first guard's voice grew harder. "That's enough. He grabbed the back of Maya's jacket and began pushing her down the steps. Leave. Now. Maya stumbled slightly, but did not stop talking. She's lying to him, she shouted. She's going to steal everything. More people turned to look. Inside the church, the music faltered for a moment. The noise outside was growing louder. One of the guards reached for his phone. I'm calling the police, he muttered. Maya felt fear rush through her. If the police arrived, she might never reach Daniel Reed. This might be her last chance. She took a deep breath and shouted as loudly as she could. Daniel Reed, don't marry her. Her voice echoed through the open church doors. And inside the building, someone heard it. Daniel Reed stood near the front of the church beside the priest. Guests filled the rows of benches. Quiet conversations moved through the room while everyone waited for the ceremony to begin. Daniel adjusted the sleeve of his jacket and glanced toward the entrance. Then the shouting reached him. Daniel Reed, don't marry her. The voice was small but desperate. The entire room seemed to freeze for a moment. Guests turned their heads. The music stopped. Daniel frowned slightly. At first, he thought someone outside was causing trouble. It sometimes happened when reporters or photographers crowded the entrance. But the voice came again. She's lying to him. She's going to steal everything. Now the words were impossible to ignore. Murmurs spread through the guests. Daniel felt something uneasy twist in his chest. He walked down the aisle slowly, trying to see what was happening near the open doors. 2 security guards stood on the steps outside. Between them was a small girl. She looked thin and frightened. One guard held the back of her jacket while the other spoke into his phone. Several guests near the entrance watched the scene with confused expressions. Daniel stopped walking. Something about the moment felt wrong. The girl was not angry. She looked desperate, as if she was trying to stop something terrible. The guard holding her turned slightly when he noticed Daniel approaching. Mr. Reed, he said quickly. Sorry about this. Just a disturbance outside. We're handling it. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the girl. Her hair was messy. Her clothes were worn. But her eyes were focused directly on him. She looked like she had something important to say. Let her go, Daniel said quietly. The guard hesitated. Sir, she's causing. Let her go, Daniel repeated. Reluctantly, the guard released Maya's jacket. Maya stood still for a second, catching her breath. Daniel stepped closer. Up close, he could see how young she was. Maybe 12. Her hands trembled slightly. What's going on? Daniel asked gently. Maya looked at him as if she had been holding her breath for hours. Don't marry her, she blurted out. The words came fast. Please, don't marry Sophie Clark. It's a trap. A shocked murmur moved through the nearby guests. Daniel blinked, confused. That's a serious thing to say, he replied calmly. Maya shook her head urgently. I heard them talking, she said. Sophie and 2 men. They have a plan to steal everything you own. One of the guards stepped forward. Sir, she's clearly making things up. But Daniel raised his hand slightly, stopping him. His eyes remained on Maya. How would you know something like that? He asked. Maya quickly pulled the cracked phone from her pocket. Her hands were shaking. I recorded them, she said. Daniel stared at the phone for a moment. Around them, the church had fallen almost completely silent. Just listen, Maya pleaded. 5 seconds is enough. The small phone trembled in Maya's hands as she held it toward Daniel. For a moment, no one spoke. Guests near the entrance watched in silence. Some leaned slightly into the aisle, trying to hear the conversation. Daniel looked at the cracked screen. Then he looked back at Maya. Her eyes were wide, serious, and filled with urgency. She did not look like someone playing a trick. Still, the accusation was unbelievable. Sophie Clark was inside the church preparing to walk down the aisle. In a few minutes, she would become his wife. And now a homeless child was telling him everything was a lie. Daniel spoke carefully. What exactly are you saying? Maya took a breath. They've been meeting here at night, she said quickly. In the small room near the altar. Sophie, a lawyer, and another man. Daniel felt a small chill move through him. That doesn't explain anything. They're planning to steal your companies, Maya continued. Your money. Your foundation. The guard beside them shook his head. This is ridiculous. But Daniel remained focused on Maya. How long have you been hearing this? He asked. 2 weeks, Maya answered. Her voice grew steadier as she continued. I sleep inside the church after it closes. Behind the last row of benches. I heard them talking one night. At first I thought it was nothing. She swallowed. But then Sophie said your name. Daniel's expression changed slightly. And you're certain it was her? He asked. Maya nodded firmly. Yes. A few guests whispered behind them. Daniel barely noticed. What exactly did you hear? He asked. Maya spoke quickly, trying not to lose the moment. She said once you sign the marriage papers, she gets half of everything. Then she makes you sign another document later. Daniel frowned. What document? Power of attorney, Maya replied. The words hung in the air. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Maya continued before anyone could interrupt. Her lawyer prepared it already. She said you would sign it without reading because you trust her. The guard shifted uncomfortably. Daniel felt his chest tighten. It was still possible this girl misunderstood something. But the details sounded strangely precise. And the recording? Daniel asked quietly. Maya lifted the phone again. I recorded them last night, she said. You can hear Sophie explaining the whole plan. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Please, she whispered. Just listen. Daniel stared at the phone again. 5 seconds. That was all she had asked for. Behind him, nearly 200 guests waited for the ceremony to begin. Inside the church, Sophie Clark was preparing to walk toward the altar. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. But something inside Daniel no longer felt certain. He reached forward slowly and took the phone. Daniel held the small phone in his hand. It felt light, fragile. The cracked screen reflected the bright lights from the church entrance. Around them, the air felt heavy with silence. Guests nearby leaned closer, pretending not to stare. The security guards watched carefully, unsure what would happen next. Maya stood very still. Her eyes never left Daniel's face. Play it, she said quietly. Daniel looked at the screen for a moment longer. Then he pressed the play button. At first there was only a faint crackling sound. The recording was clearly made from a distance. Then a voice appeared, clear enough to recognize. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. It was Sophie. Daniel Reed trusts me completely. The words echoed softly from the small speaker. Maya watched Daniel's expression change. The poor man believes every word I say. Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. Inside the church, the quiet murmurs stopped completely. Guests near the entrance had fallen silent. The recording continued. Another voice spoke. A man. You're sure he won't suspect anything? Sophie laughed. It was a light, confident laugh. The same laugh Daniel had heard many times during the past 6 months. He's lonely, she said. He wants to believe someone loves him. Daniel's stomach tightened. The voice continued. Once we're married, half of everything becomes mine legally. Another man spoke. And after that? Then he signs the rest, Sophie replied calmly. Power of attorney. Control of the companies. The accounts. Everything. Daniel felt his pulse rising in his ears. Maya watched him carefully. The recording continued playing. I've been planning this since the day I met him, Sophie said. The lawyer laughed quietly. You played the role perfectly. Of course, Sophie replied. Her tone turned colder. I attended every one of his charity events. I smiled at every homeless kid near his shelters. There was a pause. Then she said something that made several guests gasp softly. All that money going to homeless children is ridiculous. Daniel's face had turned pale. With control of the foundation, Sophie continued, I can finally move that money somewhere useful. The recording ended with another small burst of static. Silence followed. No one spoke. Daniel stared down at the phone in his hand. The world around him felt distant. 6 months of conversations. 6 months of trust. 6 months of believing someone cared about him. All of it had just collapsed in a few seconds. Slowly Daniel lifted his head. His eyes moved toward the open church doors. Inside the building, Sophie Clark was waiting near the altar. Still smiling. Still believing everything was going according to plan. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he handed the phone back to Maya. Wait here, he said quietly. Without another word, he turned and walked back into the church. If this story made you think, smile, or remember something important, then you belong in this circle. Look out for part 2. Subscribe to Afromoral Tales and help us keep these stories alive. It's free, but it means everything. And before you go, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far this circle reaches. Until the next tale, stay curious.